We're now going to look at the second tip in either developing an appropriate IEP or in assessing whether an IEP is appropriate and perhaps challenging it if necessary, or working to revise it. And that's the issue of what we call present educational levels. IEPs must identify the student's present educational levels in every area which could impact the implementation of a proper IEP. That's not just academics, it's behavioral, emotional, social, physical, so long as they affect the child's progress and the child's movement towards independence and self-sufficiency. So when we look at present educational levels, sometimes it's something that especially families can be tempted to overlook because there's such a desire to get to things like specially designed instruction, supports for school personnel, related services. But the present educational levels set that benchmark, set that starting point so that you can assess whether the child is making good progress. Unless you have that, what we call a baseline, unless you have that starting point, it's almost impossible to objectively, and objectively is a very important word, objectively assess whether that child is making meaningful progress at various stages during the school year. So the IEP really needs to set out where the child is starting from. And when we say that, this has to be stated in terms that are understandable to the layperson, that are understandable to the parents. We will, in some IEPs, we'll see where simply standard scores, a number is given to the family, which is really impossible for the family to understand unless they know psychological testing. So what really is important is that the present ed levels are identified not only in every area of need, but also set out in a way that parents can understand. So where is the child in terms of grade level? Where is the child in terms of age equivalency for particular skills? And by the way, for example, in reading, there are any number of components of reading. There's decoding, and there's phonemic awareness. There's vocabulary. There's fluency. How quickly can you read? There's that level of understanding, the comprehension. So if a child is struggling in reading, those areas of present ed levels should be broken down so you know where the child is functioning. There are children, by the way, who may have reasonably sound comprehension but can't decode. And especially when those kids get into higher levels of learning in high school and even beyond, and if they can't decode new words that are critical to understanding, that can create an exceptionally difficult barrier for learning for children. So we want to identify each of the areas of need. We want to state it in terms that are understandable to the family. And we want to break it down so that every important area and sub-area of areas of need are identified. Think of it as when you go into a hospital. What's the first thing they do? They assess where you are. What is your complaint? How's it affecting you? What are your pain levels? So all of those things, the whole concept of IEP was originally developed on a medical model. And we'll talk about that as we go through the various components of IEPs. So it's very important, just like in medicine, to start by knowing where the child is at the beginning of that IEP timeframe. And then you're able to break that down into the component areas to show where the child is, and that way you can measure objectively the progress during the school year. And a final note about present educational levels. It need not be, and for most students shouldn't be, just about their weaknesses. It should also identify the strengths and where the child is in terms of strengths. Why? Because not only do we need to identify weaknesses and work on those weaknesses, we can often use strengths to build upon to address weaknesses. So it's not just a question of where the child has needs. It's also a question of where the child has strengths so that those strengths can be identified during the IEP process and use those strengths to coordinate in areas of weakness to build on the strengths so that the weaknesses can be remediated. So we can't underestimate, I think, the importance of present educational levels. We're oftentimes tempted to get right to the specially designed instruction and therapies, but it's very, very critical to the to assessment of what's working for the child to have those present educational levels identified for strengths, for weaknesses, for all important areas that the child has areas of need, so that we can build a appropriate IEP and one that it allows us to measure what is happening during the course of that school year. And after we get through the present ed levels, then we move on to the goals, which will be the next topic of this series of presentations.